Welcome to Mastering Life's Adventures, an educational podcast about tapping into your true self, the soul, the substance of your life, to discover what life's ups and downs are really about, and how to have a greater sense of purpose, peace, joy, and fulfillment. I am Dr. Judith Holder, your host, coach, psychologist, fellow seeker who enjoys diving into the connections between spirituality, psychology, wellness, and your everyday life's adventures. All preparing and polishing you like the facets of a magnificent diamond to be your best self. If you're craving more from your life, you are in the right place. Come, let's journey together and transforming what you know into who you really are. Mastering Life's Adventures begins now.
Hi, I'm back with a delightful guest, and he's been here several times. We're doing a deep dive series, and we're doing it based upon questions that we thought you would have an interest in. It's been really nice talking about relationships and emotional issues like grief and loss. If you take a deeper dive into it, what are the soul significance of some of this and the mastery that one's trying to learn? We're all going to have ups and downs. How do we get through them? So today in our deep dive, we're going to be focused on how family power dynamics shape your soul's progress. And looking at the dynamics that happen in family, and what does that mean for our awareness about the soul? Ultimately, I think we forget the soul. But the soul is involved in all this as well. What do you think about that, Mark?
Oh, I totally agree that one of the things that affects us profoundly is our family dynamics. One of the struggles is that we don't even know that it affects us. It affects everything in our life, our behaviors, our attitude, our worldview, and as you said, our very soul. It affects who we are down to the deepest elements of our life. So many times we don't even know what effect it has because when we're children, whatever we're presented with, we just assume is normal. We don't know all these ideas of dynamics because we have nothing to compare it to. We just assume this is the way life is. This is what is normal. It's not until we get to be adults sometimes that we begin to realize not everybody did it like my family did. Sometimes that can be a struggle. As we get into relationships, we start to maybe assume that other people did it wrong, that they need to learn how to do it the way we did it in my family. And so just becoming aware of our family dynamics is going to affect all of our life, because then we can begin to see what worked and what didn't, and what is having both a positive effect on our soul and our life, and what's having a negative effect.
Yeah, and it's as if digging a little bit deeper to what you're saying there, even our communication patterns and what we learned as parents, or what we learned if we had siblings, affects how we communicate. And also unconscious behaviors we'll start to engage in because we saw it in our family members as we just kind of imbibed it into us as a part of the process of growing and developing. And then we also have this whole aspect about what is quote unquote right and what is wrong, in terms of what parents will say, this is the right way, this is the wrong way. And maybe there's some truth to that, but also it does ingrain upon us how we start to make certain structures and behaviors, why we do what we do. And so I've always been interested in this quality, maybe as a psychologist, but also as a coach, but why do we do what we do? And part of that is family. And also the epigenetics and patterns that we pass from generation to generation that maybe is not done in this immediate family, but your grandfather or your grandmother, your uncle, and did the same thing. You'll hear it from your parents. So there's many different dynamics that are swimming around that affect your family, also affecting who you are.
For example, I spoke with a person one time who was really struggling in the workplace because of a dynamic she had with one individual at her office. She came from a family that was rather quiet, and if there was a conflict, the way they dealt with that was to go to their own room, take a walk, take a breath, and then come back. Sometimes just getting away, they realized, this is petty. I don't need to fight about this. Other times they would come back because they had thought through it and would present their case. And they say, I can't let this go. This is what I think. They would do it in a rational, calm manner because that's what their family had done. She was working with someone at the workplace whose family was, if you've got something on your mind, get it out. Say it. Whatever is on your chest, get it off your chest. Don't keep secrets. Don't bottle things up. Just get everything out, vent whenever you need to. And that keeps everything open, honest, and transparent. At the end of the day, we love each other no matter what. He was quite volatile while she was very quiet and reserved, and they were clashing, walked away to get her space. He felt like she was being rude and rejecting him and refusing to work with him. And when he would get volatile, she felt like she was being attacked. And both of them were good people. Both of them did a good job in the office. They just came from these family dynamics that were so different, and neither quite got that at first. And you just think about how that affects you when every day you dread going into the office because you're going to have to deal with that person. So many people have dealt with that. It just affects, you just dread. Sometimes you don't even sleep well at night because you think, oh my goodness, tomorrow I've got to deal with him or I've got to deal with her. And we've got this project due. And how are we going to get through this? And it just wears on us. It wears on our mind. It wears on our soul. When it doesn't have to be that way, if we understood that this is part of our family dynamic. This is just the way we were raised. It's not right or it's wrong, and it's not wrong, as you said. There are some things, obviously, in life that are right or wrong. Those dynamics, as I've described, can work. It's not right or wrong. It's just what worked in that family. And so we can have that same example in our marriages or with a neighbor or even with some of our extended family that may have a slightly different dynamic. All of these behavior patterns really have a big effect. And again, we have to be aware of that it is coming from our family. It's not just how we're wired up. It's not just what is right or wrong. It's just what we were taught.
I think what happens is that we get into the comfort zone of just saying, well, this is just the way that my family is, and therefore accept that. And if we are not willing, and part of the soul's progress is looking at how do we need to refine who we are. And who we may be is have some rough edges to it. So do we keep the rough edges? Or do we learn to say, okay, I could set that better, or I could engage in the behavior in a different way? There's some self-awareness that has to take place. And this is what the soul wants. The soul wants you to be aware that there is a standard of being. And the higher standard, or the soul standard, or the Christ standard, is God's standard. Loving your brother as yourself is a standard, as well as seeking the higher road than the lower road in terms of confusion, anger, bitterness, or argumentation. But what is the harmonious way? Still saying what you need to say, but you're not out of control in the process of saying that.
If you begin to say, that's just the way I was raised, you can begin there if you want, but what's your next argument? What's your next reason that you're doing that now? You're not 12 anymore. It may work when you're 12 years old, but when you're an adult, that's not a reason to do anything. Have better reasons than that. And if you can't, then that's time for reflection, maybe counseling and prayer. Why am I doing this? And what do I want to do? What do I need to do? And what am I called to do?
Yeah, what you're really getting at is if you're going to use that phrase, then use it as what's the best word? You want to use it as a awareness point. And when I say that, it comes out of my mouth. It means I need to stop and look.
Exactly. It's time to reflect.
Reflect and look a little bit deeper into, okay, that keeps on coming up for me when it relates to this particular behavior. I'm working with this type of person or interacting with this type of family member. They always trigger me. Well, that trigger is actually an opportunity for you to learn from, to say, okay, if you keep on triggering me, it means there's something in me that I need to change for you to not to trigger it anymore. But instead, what we tend to do in family dynamics especially is your fault. You're the one who made me do this. You did it, and therefore I had to do something back at you. And it's like, no, you're in control of yourself, and your soul wants you to gain greater mastery of these conditions. I think we're born into families in order to learn certain lessons and to grow and teach other family members certain lessons as well. But there is a standard by which we need to do that by, and that gets lost in the shuffle of things.
Exactly right. We are a creation of God. And that's what we are created to be, is that image of God. Sometimes our family can help us in that, and sometimes they will not. What I think is the good news, while this may not be an easy journey for everyone, you can make different choices. As you said, it's time to reflect. When we hear ourselves say or feel the attitude, that's just the way I was raised, don't fall into that and think, oh, well, can't do anything about that. Yes, you can. You can choose a different path. One of the reasons why I had such a good childhood, and my sister and I were so fortunate to be raised in a healthy, happy family, is because my dad made a conscious choice. I will raise my children different than I was raised. Because my grandfather, by the time I came along, he had stopped drinking and he was a good man and he always treated me well. But we can't say that about my father's experience. When he was a child, his father, my grandfather, was a heavy drinker and a mean drunk. My dad had a really tough time growing up, and he made that conscious decision that he would raise his family different than he was raised, and he did. I have such a different experience as a child than he had. My grandfather changed over the years, and I had a good relationship with him, and so did my dad. As an adult, they were able to have a good relationship later in life. But those decisions can be made, and I'm not the only one that has that kind of story. Lots of people have the story of, I was raised a certain way, and I realized that's not what I was called to be. That's not who I was created to be. And so there's a journey in that. It's not easy, but we can make different choices. We are not enslaved by our family dynamic. It is an influence, but it is not something that we have to adhere to. It is something that we can learn from and we can expand upon when we need to.
Sometimes it can feel like we are enslaved by those dynamics, family dynamics, that we have a straitjacket on. We can't get the straitjacket off because of certain things that have happened to us, especially as it relates to family dynamics and trauma. Be it physical abuse, sexual abuse, emotional abuse that has taken place in that particular family dynamic. Thoughts about that?
Oh, absolutely. The more extreme example we're talking about, when we start talking about toxicity, we start talking about abuse, that literally does affect our brains. It affects how we react mentally and emotionally, and that's going to be tough to overcome, but it can be overcome. I really can't see a scenario that someone was raised in a toxic or abusive family and they overcome that on their own. This is not a pick yourself up by your bootstraps situation. This is going to require help. If you were raised in an abusive family, first of all, you got to be aware of that. Understand that was not how you were called to be treated. That was wrong. And you can overcome that, but it is going to require help. You're going to need to get in with a coach or counselor, therapist, and it may require medication because our brains are affected by that. And to set that brain chemistry correct, then sometimes that takes medication. And there's nothing wrong with any of that. If you were raised in an abusive household, that is going to do the same kind of damage as if someone attacked you physically. And it may have been physical abuse, and that will affect our bodies. But mental and emotional abuse will affect our minds. And so will the physical abuse, sexual abuse. It affects us deeply. And so get help for that. Don't try to do that alone. I can't see a scenario where that's possible just to get through that alone. You may be functional, but you're not going to be thriving until you get the help you need.
And like you said, it's on a continuum. So even though no type of abuse is acceptable or appropriate, you can have mild to very severe and above severe.
Yes.
That really require the support and the help around it, because that dynamic is now ingrained in some ways in your psyche. What you're literally trying to do is start to observe yourself. There are certain things, self-help things you can do, along with the things that you may do with a counselor or a coach or a minister. But you want to be able to observe yourself, observe those patterns, observe those things that you have trust issues around, for example. And you know that you can't really trust people very well. There may be things about finances and how you spend your money, because once you get it, you spend it out very quickly because that's your sense of security or your sense of power. But at the same time, it disempowers you because then you don't have any money and you have credit debt that takes place. It may manifest itself in a way in which you're in a relationship and find yourself being jealous because of the type of attention she never received. So it can manifest in many different ways. And the only way that you're going to be starting to be aware of how it's manifesting, this type of family dynamic, of that's toxicity, as you talked about, is to observe yourself, observe your reactions, see what you're thinking about. Where's your attention go to? Where do your feelings go to? And then begin to say, I choose not to do that. And so there are some things out here besides therapy that can be of help to you. There are programs available to you. And we certainly can talk about that at some time, but it's really beginning the process of saying, what have I noticed going on to me? What are the things that are awkward and uncomfortable in my interaction with other individuals? Because when we're alone, we may be fine.
Right.
When we engage in other people, now that engagement in other people is what the soul wants you to do. So you become aware and start to think, be, act differently.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something very important there. There really is a tendency when things are a struggle to think, if everyone just got their act together, I'd be fine, because I'm fine when I'm alone. I feel fine when no one's bothering me. And if everybody else would just get their act together, then we would all be just fine. Maybe theoretically, if everyone acted the way you want them to all the time, sure, but that's not going to happen. And we do have to understand that it might be us, or at least a portion of us, of how we're reacting, of how this is manifested in our life. If you don't have self-reflection, if you don't have counseling, if you don't have awareness, if you aren't really doing the self-work of the soul, if you're just winging it, you're going to end up like your family. We've all had that experience where we say something and think, oh my goodness, that was my dad, or that was my mom. It just came out and we didn't even expect it. It was just like, that's exactly what they used to say. And, that's not necessarily bad, but it goes to illustrate that if we're just on cruise control, letting life happen, you're going to end up just like your family. If your family was healthy, happy, thriving, that might be okay for you. You may still have some struggles with people that didn't have the raising you did. But if you came from a toxic family, a dysfunctional family, or certainly an abusive family, and you just wing it, you're going to end up just like that. That's why so many people that were abused become abusers, because we're just kind of going with life and seeing what happens, and we end up doing exactly what our family did. So it's important to have that awareness and understand you don't have to do that. It can change.
With the awareness that God's here to help us too.
Yes.
When you see a behavior come up, do you say to yourself, in the name of Jesus Christ, I call it to be consumed. Let it be bound. Let it be transmuted. I no longer want this piece of energy in my life any longer. And every time you see it come up, you're making a statement to say, you need to be gone, and let it be filled in with light, love, harmony, and peace. So that it allows the soul to wake up, to be able to say, oh, we can help here. Because what happens when trauma does happen to an individual, it also puts the soul like in a prison, in a basement where you can't get out, or in the attic. It keeps it confined. And so the soul says, I need for you to let me out so I can begin to help you to get the intuition or the prompting, attunement with what is going to be helpful to move forward. And that's where sometimes when we are able to unite with our soul a bit more, and we're willing to follow the promptings, then you go to see a right person at the right time. You end up finding a book from the library. That actually happened to me one time, not in the library, but in a bookstore. I love books. And I said, what book should I read here? I was asking my inner self, what do you want me to read here? And a book fell out.
That's awesome.
Why? Which was right in attunement with what I needed at that time. It's like 2 decades ago. You have to realize that you're not alone, even though you may feel alone, especially in times of abuse, neglect, or toxicity in the family dynamics. You have your soul. And the awareness that your creator is always wanting to help. But you have to also do something in order for the creator to help, because we live on a planet of free will. It's the call that compels the answer. So we need to ask for help. The angels, the masters, or other spiritual beings can support us and help us along our way. But that requires attunement, self-reflection, being willing to be open to figuring out what I need to do here.
Yeah, it's a matter of understanding who we really are. Yes, your family created a certain dynamic, certain habits, certain attitudes. It affected your brain, the way it's wired up. It affected a lot of things, but that's not who you are. It can feel like we're just a product of our family upbringing, but that's not true, because when we get into that soul, we get into that creation of who we really are. We are a creation of God, and that's not something your family can change. And so your family can enhance that, your family can hinder that in some ways, but ultimately it cannot change who God created you to be. It's understanding the deeper level of your soul, of who you actually are created to be, not the dynamics that your family kind of wired into you and that you were taught growing up was normal and began to just experience as normal. When we get past that with deeper awareness, we begin to understand our family didn't create us. God created us, and our family can hinder that or help that. But either way, what we need to do is get into who we actually are created to be and start living that out. There's spiritual help with that. It's not a flip the switch situation, but one of the things that I've taught for a long time, I led a recovery group, an addiction recovery group for a long time. And what I would say to people every time we gathered is that we believe in miracles. Sometimes that miracle could take place instantly. And when that happens, we love it. But sometimes that miracle takes place inch by inch, step by step, little by little. And then we look back and we think, well, it's pretty miraculous what's happened in my life over the last year. And that's a miracle too. And sometimes with these family dynamics, we need to understand that this is not usually a miracle that's going to take place instantly. I don't want to dismiss that, but I've never seen it happen, because we are talking about an understanding of who we are, a misconception of who we are, and a great intense influence on us. But when we begin to have that journey of the soul and understand we're created to be something different than the abuser that we were raised with, or the toxic or dysfunctional, maybe even just the mildly dysfunctional that we need to change, maybe just some about our life. When we understand that miracles can take place over time with programs, counseling, prayer, and other things, little by little, that miracle takes place and we become the person we're created to be.
I think we live in time and space. Given to the soul and our experiences is that it's like Groundhog's Day. We can do it again and again until we get that particular behavior, that particular thought or action right. And that is more in attunement with God's will and God's victory in our lives. But we don't want to overly say, okay, well, I have tomorrow. I have the next day. I can do it then. It's like you're delaying. Sometimes we have to look at issues around procrastination. We have to look at issues around avoidance that's taking place. And when we can be able to do that and just say, why am I avoiding this? What is this family member triggering me that I don't want to approach or look at or get angry about or emotional about or upset about or whatever it may be? Again, that's a warning sign. It's saying, okay, I'm avoiding. So let me lean in, because it will be leaning in with my soul and mind and asking my soul, so what's happening here? And being quiet and listening and being aware of the fact that just because you acquired that 1 minute, it doesn't mean that God nor your soul believes you're going to continue with it. So it has to be a regular practice that allows your soul to realize you really mean business. You do want support. Working with a great awareness of your inner self or with a counselor, they need to know too that you continue to avoid all the sessions you use to support you, and you're still doing the same behavior. It needs to be examined and looked at. You have to be the first to do that and not think your counselor, coach, or minister is going to resolve all the issues. They support you. They give you awarenesses to help you to look at things, but you have to do the work.
It's such an important question that you raised when you say, why? Why am I doing this? Why is this my reaction? And when we start to really examine that, we start to see that these family dynamics have pushed us in this direction and led us to act this way or feel this way or behave in this manner. Those are things that happen to us. That's not us. Those are influences on our life. We can choose different leadership. We can choose to have the leadership of God. We can choose better examples in our life and other mentors. We don't have to adhere to those things, those influences, but we have to ask ourselves, why? Why am I feeling like this? And when we say, well, that's the way I was raised. That's the way my mom taught me. That's the way my dad always did things. Then we can say, well, that's not the way I choose to do things. That's not the way I want to do it. So I get to choose different. Is that easy? No, because it's going to take a while to get to a place that's more natural. But that's where we begin of asking, why am I doing this? And if we don't have a good answer, then decide what we want to do.
Yeah, and attached to that question of why and when and how does it come up and where does it come up, I think we can attach to that being able to say in the name of Jesus or in the name of Mary or the name of whoever you want to put in the blank there. Teach me, guide me, let me see what's going on here. Help me to be more attuned to the way you are, Jesus. In your example of your life of discernment, I think sometimes that's where we don't ask enough of. Give me the discernment or an awareness of the distinctions between this and what's going to be the better behavior for me in my life as I'm trying to move forward.
Yeah. It's so easy to say, well, that's just the way I was raised, but it should hopefully get to a place in our life, if we're a person of faith, that would say, that's just what Jesus taught me. And that can be just as powerful. But if at the beginning, it won't seem it, because it's like, well, yeah, we should do that. That would be nice if we followed Jesus' example, but this is the way I was raised. And that will feel more powerful, but it's not about feelings, it's about choices. And so as we progress, we can say, yeah, I was raised this way, but this is how Jesus taught me. This is how I am led in my spirit, in my soul. That's different than my family. And that can become just as natural. As we allow ourselves to live into that, it can be just as much of a knee-jerk reaction to say, that's just how Jesus taught me.
You said the combination of feeling versus choices. Feelings are like magnets to filings. They attract very much and it feels so stuck and it feels so real, that particular feeling we're having. And therefore, since it feels real, it must be real. And actuality is not true.
No.
And it isn't something that was created. And you use God's energy to create that. But why not look at the choices? I have a choice. Do I want to continue that? Or do I want to make a better choice? And sometimes we need to meditate on what would be the higher choice, the best choice for me and how I want to live my life. And therefore, what are my goals? What are my values? What's important to me that would allow me to take on the good qualities of my family and be able to say the other qualities I don't need?
It's so important to understand that road that leads us to think my feelings lead to my behaviors. I feel this way, so I naturally react this way. That road runs both ways. Yes, feelings lead to behaviors, but behaviors also lead to feelings. Sometimes we have to choose to have a certain behavior and the feelings will eventually catch up. It may not be instant, but eventually that road runs both directions. Yes, our feelings lead to our behaviors, but when we realize these behaviors aren't working for me, this is not how I want to live my life, it's not what I'm created to be, our behaviors can lead to new feelings that reinforce those new behaviors. That's a pattern of time. That doesn't happen instantly, but don't get caught up thinking I have no real choice because I feel so strongly this way. How am I going to react any other way? It can go the other direction. Your feelings will also follow your behaviors. So make your choices, get people around you to support that choice. And eventually that feeling will follow and those new behaviors will feel just as natural as the old ones used to.
As you're saying that, it's what I think also wraps around those feelings is kind of the mental mindset that we do have. And above that, I think, is the memories. So what we're trying to do is really try to change the pathway of our memories and realize that's old memory. What is the new one that I want to set? What are the new experiences that I want to have that has, a more likeness to the memories that we have? Because some people get really engaged in rumination, for example, because of some past family behaviors or actions. It's easy to get the mind spinning into these memories that we do have. But in actuality, if we want to win, we need to unwind that and move the opposite direction and just say, that's an old memory. Why am I needing to think of it now? Can I think differently? And if I were to think differently, what would that look like? And let me put my attention to that. Because where we put our attention is where we have greater experiences.
If we ruminate on these things, our brains don't really distinguish between the things that are going on in our imagination and in reality. And so when we ruminate on these things, Our brains, our bodies, our minds, they react as if this is happening over and over again. And that's just not healthy. That's going to weigh us down. And that's one of the reasons we feel so drained and so frustrated in life, because we've allowed ourselves to ruminate on these things, and our bodies are reacting with the same kind of emotions and chemical releases as if it were happening over and over again. And so we have to break that pattern. This takes a little time, takes some retraining, but we can choose to act the way we want to and build the life that we actually want and the one we were created for. It does take some practice to train our mindset, but our brain is like a muscle like any other. It's like getting into the gym. It's not easy. It's going to take a while to build those muscles in the gym, but they will build. If you keep at it, little at a time, it will work. The brain maneuvers the same way. If you practice new behaviors, you practice new thought patterns, you do this on purpose, your brain will begin to form those new neural pathways, and your brain will begin to ruminate on more positive things and more exciting things and the things you want to be in your life. There's an old saying, I don't really like this saying, but I think for some people it can be helpful: to fake it till you make it. I think I could analyze that and say there's problems with that phrase, but in some ways you just do. It may not be how you feel today, but how are you choosing to live your life? What kind of positive way are you directing your life? Do that, even if you don't feel it, because it may feel odd at first. It may feel fake, like you're pretending to be somebody else, but the only reason it feels that way is because you don't have the neural pathways yet. Your brain hasn't adapted to understand this is who I am. And it takes a little while to get those synapses going. And the more you practice it, the more it will feel natural, and it will become just as natural as the old ways. Eventually, our brains can adapt that way.
When you were saying that about feelings, I was thinking, well, what if we start thinking about our feelings are fake? And we start thinking that, it's like the Matrix.
I love that.
There's a lot of illusions that are going on, and our feelings can be feeling like they're real, but maybe our feelings, especially if they're negative, if the negative nature or the traumatic types of, these are fake feelings that our neural pathways are created because we've thought about it and we've done it, or we engaged in the behavior for a period of time, but they're fake because really, as a co-creator with God only has those feelings that are harmonious and peaceful and loving. It doesn't mean that God's not firm. It puts down some discipline, but it's an entirely different way than some of these feelings that we're carrying as if they're real and therefore is all of who I am. But as you said, it's not who you are. Your creator created you in a different image. You came for certain experiences to be able to grow, and that's allowing the soul to grow, but don't get stuck there. So think about, are these feelings fake?
I love that. Yeah, absolutely. If you practice new behaviors, it can feel fake, but who said? Who said that these feelings are right and these feelings are not because they're new? Those feelings that you had, they came about very often as a child that didn't even understand what was happening. Why are we putting such stock in those? We didn't have the maturity and the understanding that we do as an adult. We didn't have the opportunities to change behaviors or influence our own life. And we didn't have a full spiritual understanding at the time as we may have now. Why are we putting such stock in those feelings that came from our childhood, particularly if we did have a difficult childhood and difficult family dynamics? Those feelings are just feelings, and we can be aware of them, but they don't have to dictate our life. We can choose to have new behaviors, and those will create new feelings that are just as valid.
Right. We can choose to have joy.
Yes.
We can choose to be happier. We can choose to maintain harmony and peace. And what we put our attention to, or put our focus around, we find ways to do it in the midst of a situation. Just because we have a difficult situation, of family dynamics, or just a living of life, we can say, you know what? Yeah, it was kind of rough and hard to get through that, but I choose happiness. I choose joy. I choose to fill in the blank, because that keeps our focus and our intention about who we really want to be, as opposed to being pulled back into an old image or old thought pattern or old memories or behaviors, not serving us in any way and not serving the soul. So if you were to give a final comment or thought to what we've been talking about as we are looking at how family dynamics or power dynamics really impact, shape the soul, what would you say in terms of how, what do you want the listeners to walk away with?
I want everyone to understand you're a creation of God, not a creation of your family. Your family may have assisted in that development of that creation of God, if they were in tune to God as well. But in some cases, that family dynamic was not what God intended it to be. You are still a creation of God, not a creation of your family. And so get in touch with your soul work, do that soul work to find out who you really are created to be and live into. That's the life you were intended to live.
Great. Totally agree. And so, Mark, if they want to reach you, where would they reach out to you?
Go to my website. It's markahicks.com. Make sure you get my middle initial in there. And you can find links to my book, my free ebook, and my podcast. There's a contact form where you can reach me. I'm available for speaking engagements, workshops, coaching. Just let me know how I can be of service.
Excellent. Well, thank you, listeners, for joining us. Be aware that you are definitely more than your family, and you're a great soul here to have experiences and learning from those experiences. So bye for now.
Thank you for joining me for this episode on Mastering Life's Adventures, being your best self through soul evolution. If you have enjoyed what you've heard today, I would be delighted if you would share this episode with others, leave a thumbs up, and subscribe to my Mastering Life's Adventures podcast. Look forward to your joining the next episode. Please leave any comments or suggestions you might have below. Bye for now.